Om Ajnanatimidandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Dhena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah.
Hare Krishna, welcome everybody. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Welcome to those who have joined us on Facebook and also on Zoom. And tonight, we're going to churn the nectar from the Srimad Bhagavatam, because that's the only solution to life's problems. First, I offer my respectful obeisances to my spiritual master, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, and to all of you who have joined me online tonight. Hare Krishna. Gaur Premanande Haribol. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. And before I start, let's anyone who's on Zoom, you can just check in.
Hare Krishna, Dandat Pranam.
Hare Krishna, Shraddha Devi Dasi. Koladweep. Hare Krishna. I can't hear you.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, this is Bhakti and Shraddha.
Bhakti and Shraddha, Haribol.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, this is Bhakti Varsha.
Jai Bhakti Varsha. Anjali.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Jai. Hare Krishna, Lekha. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. How are you
Thank
doing?
you for joining. Hari Haribo. So tonight I'm going to read from chapter 16 of the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And the title of this chapter is Krishna Chastises the Serpent Kalia. Text number 1. Shukadeva Goswami said, Lord Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, seeing that the Jamuna River had been contaminated by the black snake Kalia, desired to purify the river, and thus the Lord banished him from it. King Parikshit inquired, O learned sage, please explain how the Supreme Personality of Godhead chastised the serpent Kalia within the unfathomable waters of the Jamuna, and how it was that Kalia had been living there for so many ages. O Brahmana, the unlimited Supreme Personality of Godhead freely acts according to his own desires. Who could be satiated when hearing the nectar of the magnanimous pastimes he performed as a cowherd boy in Vrindavan? Sri Shukadeva Goswami said, within the river Kalindi, Jamuna, was a lake inhabited by the serpent Kalia, whose fiery poison constantly heated and boiled its waters. Indeed, the vapors thus created were so poisonous that birds flying over the contaminated lake would fall down into it. Purport. In this regard, the Acharyas explained that the Kalia lake was situated apart from the main current of the river. Otherwise, the Jamuna's waters would have been poisonous even in cities like Mathura and other places far away. The wind blowing over that deadly lake carried droplets of water to the shore. Simply by coming in contact with that poisonous breeze, all vegetation and creatures on the shore died. Purport. The word stira, unmoving creatures, refers to various types of vegetation, including trees, and jangama refers to moving creatures such as animals, reptiles, birds, and insects. Srila Sridhar Swami has quoted a further description of this lake from the Sri Harivamsha Vishnu Parva. Quote, the lake was quite wide, 8 miles across at some points, and even the demigods could not cross over it. The water in the lake was very deep and, like the immovable depths of the ocean, could not be agitated. Approaching the lake was difficult, for its shores were covered with holes in which serpents lived. All around the lake was a fog generated by the fire of the serpent's poison, and this powerful fire would at once burn up every blade of grass that happened to fall into the water. For a distance of 8 miles from the lake, the atmosphere was most unpleasant. Srila Sanatana Goswami states that by the mystical science of Jalastamba, making solid items out of water, Kalia had built his own city within the lake. 6. Lord Krishna saw how the Kalia serpent had polluted the Jamuna River with his terribly powerful poison. Since Krishna had descended from the spiritual world specifically to subdue envious demons, the Lord immediately climbed to the top of a very high Kadamba tree and prepared himself for battle. He tightened his belt, slapped his arms, and then jumped into the poisonous water. Purport, according to the Acharyas, Lord Krishna also tied back the locks of his hair as he prepared to do battle with Kalia. When the Supreme Personality of Godhead landed in the Serpent's Lake, the snakes there became extremely agitated and began breathing heavily, further polluting it with volumes of poison. The force of the Lord's entrance into the lake caused it to overflow on all sides, and poisonous, fearsome waves flooded the surrounding lands up to a distance of 100 bow lengths. This is not at all amazing, however, for the Supreme Lord possesses infinite strength. Text 8. Krishna began sporting in Kalia's lake like a lordly elephant, swirling his mighty arms and making the water resound in various ways. When Kalia heard these sounds, he understood that someone was trespassing in his lake. The serpent could not tolerate this and immediately came forward. Purport. According to the Acharyas, Lord Krishna was producing wonderful musical sounds within the water simply by splashing his hands and arms. 9. Kalia saw that Sri Krishna, who wore yellow silken garments, was very delicate. His attractive body shining like a glowing white cloud, his chest bearing the mark of Srivatsa, his face smiling beautifully, and his feet resembling the whorl of a lotus flower. The Lord was playing fearlessly in the water. Despite his wonderful appearance, the envious Kalia furiously bit him on the chest and then completely enwrapped him in his coils. When the members of the cowherd community who had accepted Krishna as their dearmost friend saw him enveloped in the snake's coils, motionless, they were greatly disturbed. They had offered Krishna everything, their very selves, their families, their wealth, wives, and all pleasure. At the sight of the Lord in the clutches of the Kalia snake, their intelligence became deranged by grief, lamentation, and fear, and thus they fell to the ground. Purport. Srila Sanatana Goswami explains that the cowherd boys, along with some cowherd men and farmers who happened to be in the vicinity and who were also devotees of Krishna, fell to the ground just like trees that had been cut at the root. The cows, bulls, and female calves in great distress called out piteously to Krishna. Fixing their eyes on him, they stood still in fear, as if ready to cry, but too shocked to shed tears. In the Vrindavan area, there then rose all three types of fearful omens: those from the earth, those in the sky, and those in the bodies of living creatures, which announced imminent danger. Purport. According to Srila Sridhar Swami, the omens were as follows. Just one second. On the earth, there were disturbing tremors. In the sky, there were meteors falling. And in the bodies of creatures, there was shivering, as well as quivering of the left eye and other parts of the body. These omens announce imminent danger. Seeing the inauspicious omens, Nanda Maharaj and the other cowherd men were fearful, for they knew that Krishna had gone to herd the cows that day without his elder brother Balaram. Because they had dedicated their minds to Krishna, accepting him as their very life, they were unaware of his great power and opulence. Thus they concluded that the inauspicious omens indicated he had met with death. And they were overwhelmed with grief, lamentation, and fear. All the inhabitants of Vrindavan, including the children, women, and elderly persons, thought of Krishna just as a cow thinks of her helpless young calf, and thus these poor suffering people rushed out of the village intent upon finding him. The Supreme Lord Balaram, the master of all transcendental knowledge, smiled and said nothing when he saw the residents of Vrindavan in such distress, since he understood the extraordinary power of his younger brother. Purport. Sri Balaram is the plenary expansion of Lord Krishna and is thus non-different from him. They are, in fact, the same absolute truth manifest in separate forms. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Lord Balaram was laughing because he thought, Krishna never cares to play with me in my form of Sheshanaga, that now he is playing with this ordinary mundane snake named Kalia. The question may arise as to why Krishna and Balaram allowed their loving devotees to suffer such great anguish during Krishna's temporary imprisonment within the coils of Kalia. It must be remembered that because the inhabitants of Vrindavan were completely liberated souls, they did not experience material emotions. When they saw their beloved Krishna in apparent anger, their love for him intensified to the highest degree, and thus they merged completely into the ecstasy of love for him. The whole situation has to be seen from the spiritual point of view, or it will not be seen at all. Text 17. The residents hurried toward the banks of the Jamuna in search of their dearmost Krishna, following the path marked by his footprints, which bore the unique signs of the personality of Godhead. The footprints of Lord Krishna, the master of the entire cowherd community, were marked with the lotus flower, barley corn, elephant goad, thunderbolt, and flag. My dear King Parikshit, seeing his footprints on the path, among the cows' hoofprints, the residents of Vrindavan rushed along in great haste. Purport. Srila Sanatana Goswami comments as follows. Since Lord Krishna had passed along the path some time previously, why weren't his footprints, which were surrounded by those of cows, cowherd boys, and so on, smudged over and brushed away? Why hadn't his footprints been obliterated by those of the beasts and birds of Vrindavan forest? The answer is indicated by the word Vishpati, master of the cowherd community. Since Lord Krishna is actually the wealth of all living beings, all the inhabitants of the forest of Vraja would carefully preserve his footprints as great treasures, the very ornaments of the earth. Thus, no creature within Vrindavan would ever walk upon Lord Krishna's footprints. 19. As they hurried along the path to the bank of the Jamuna River, they saw from a distance that Krishna is in the lake, motionless within the coils of the black serpent. They further saw that the cowherd boys had fallen unconscious and that the animals were standing on all sides crying out for Krishna. Seeing all this, the residents of Vrindavan were overwhelmed with anguish and confusion. Anguish and confusion. Purport: in their grief and panic, the residents of Vrindavan tried to find out whether Kalia had forcibly dragged young Krishna from the shore into the water, or whether Krishna had himself jumped from the shore and fallen into the clutches of the snake. They could not understand anything about the situation, and Krishna's cowherd boyfriends, being unconscious, were unable to tell them anything. The cows and calves were crying out for Krishna, and thus the whole situation was overwhelming and created a state of shock and panic among the residents of Vrindavan. When the young gopis, whose minds were constantly attached to Krishna, the unlimited Supreme Lord, saw that he was now within the grips of the serpent, they remembered his loving friendship, his smiling glances, and his talks with them. Burning with great sorrow, they saw the entire world as void. Although the elder gopis were feeling just as much distress as she and were pouring forth a flood of sorrowful tears, they had to forcibly hold back Krishna's mother, whose consciousness was totally absorbed in her son. Standing like corpses, with their eyes fixed upon his face, these gopis each took turns recounting the pastimes of the darling of Vraja. Lord Balaram then saw that Nanda Maharaj and the other cowherd men who had dedicated their very lives to Krishna were beginning to enter the serpent's lake. As the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Balaram fully knew Lord Krishna's actual power, and therefore he restrained them. Srila Sanatana Goswami explains that Lord Balaram checked some of the cowherd men by speaking to them, others by physically holding them, and still others by casting upon them his potent smiling glance. Distraught over the situation, they were prepared to give up their lives for Lord Krishna by entering the serpent's lake. 23. The Lord remained for some time within the coils of the serpent, imitating the behavior of an ordinary mortal. But when he understood that the women, children, and other residents of his village of Gokula were in acute distress because of their love for him, their only shelter and goal in life, he immediately rose up from the bonds of the Kalia serpent. I'm going to read this verse again, as it's a pivotal point in the pastime. The Lord remained for some time within the coils of the serpent, imitating the behavior of an ordinary mortal. But when he understood that the women, children, and other residents of his village of Gokula were in acute distress because of their love for him, their only shelter and goal in life, he immediately rose up from the bonds of the Kalia serpent. 24. His coils, tormented by the expanding body of the Lord, Kalia released him. In great anger, the serpent then raised his hoods high and stood still, breathing heavily. His nostrils appeared like vessels for cooking poison, and the staring eyes in his face like firebrands. Thus the serpent looked at the Lord. Again and again, Kalia licked his lips with his bifurcated tongues as he stared at Krishna with a glance full of terrible poisonous fire. But Krishna playfully circled around him, just as Garuda would play with a snake. In response, Kalia also moved about, looking for an opportunity to bite the Lord. Purport: Lord Krishna moved around the serpent so skillfully that Kalia could find no opportunity to bite him. Thus the snake was defeated by Sri Krishna's transcendental agility. Having severely depleted the serpent's strength with his relentless circling, Sri Krishna, the origin of everything, pushed down Kalia's raised shoulders and mounted his broad serpentine heads. Thus, Lord Sri Krishna, the original master of all fine arts, began to dance. His lotus feet, deeply reddened by the touch of the numerous jewels upon the serpents' heads. Purport. Sri Harivamsha states, Shira Krishna Jagraha Swa Hastinavanam Banamya. Krishna grabbed Kalia's head with his hand and forced it to bow down. Most people in this world are quite reluctant to bow down to the Supreme Person, the Absolute Truth. In the contaminated state called material consciousness, we conditioned souls become proud of our insignificant position and are thus reluctant to bow our heads before the Lord. Yet just as Lord Krishna forcibly pushed Kalia's heads down and thus defeated him, the Supreme Lord's energy in the form of irresistible time kills all conditioned souls and thus forces them to bow down their arrogant heads. We should therefore give up the artificial position of material life and become faithful servants of the Supreme Lord, enthusiastically bowing down at his lotus feet. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that Lord Krishna's lotus feet became red like copper because of their contact with the numerous hard jewels upon the heads of Kalia. Lord Krishna, with whose glowing reddish feet then began to demonstrate his artistic skill by dancing on the unsteady, moving surface of the serpent's hoods. This extraordinary demonstration of dancing skill was meant for the pleasure of the young women of Vrindavan, who, at this phase of their relationship with Krishna, were seriously falling in love with him. So Prabhupada mentions here in relationship to Krishna pushing down the hoods of Kalia, the ways in which the conditioned souls in the material world don't want to give up their false pride. Even though it's evident that we're no match for material nature, there's a sort of determination in the conditioned soul to one way or another be victorious and somehow become the Lord and Master of the world. When there's a collective memory in the heart of a conditioned soul, or an accumulation of memory about being defeated in the material world, and then when such a conditioned soul comes in contact with Krishna consciousness, with a devotee, the combination will give that soul an impetus to look to Krishna and surrender. In fact, in the Gita, Krishna says, Chaturvida bhajanti mam jana sukritino arjuna, arto jignasa artarti jnani cha bharatarshibha. 4 kinds of pious men turn to me. One of them is the distressed. Another one is one who's inquisitive. Another one somebody who wants money. And the other is those who are in knowledge of the absolute truth. They're all called pious souls because they turn to Krishna. There's some accumulation of piety, some agyata sukriti, previous engagement in some kind of devotional service. And then when they get in distress, they turn toward Krishna. Hearing from the Srimad Bhagavatam is really important because again and again, we hear in vivid detail about how we're no match for the material energy. And real friction comes in the life of the tiny conditioned soul when he thinks that somehow or other I'll overcome. And he works hard simply to overcome the miseries of life and to try to get a little bit of happiness. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, actually, there's no happiness in the material world. There's only a temporary relief from all the stress, de-stress, and misery. And he gave the comparison of how kings used to take a dunking board and they put a criminal on the board and dunk him down into the river. And when he was almost drowning, they'd pull him up and let him get a breath of air. And when he got a breath, they'd push him back down again, over and over again. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu compares this to the plight of the living entity in the material world, trying to overcome the insurmountable material nature And every once in a while, there may be a respite. But that's not happiness. That's just a respite before we get dunked again. So we'll find in this pastime that Kalia was like that. Like what? That he thought he had his own kingdom. He was envious of others. He was envious of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But Krishna beat him down. And this is mentioned in the Mahabharata. Krishna himself says, Yasyaham anagundnami harishe taddaram shanai. When I show causeless mercy to a devotee, I push him down. I take away his assets and make him feel helpless. So he just turns to me exclusively. It's in that moment when a living entity turns exclusively to Krishna that he actually starts to feel happiness. That's the only time. There's never another time. Only then. I always relish the story of Sanatana Goswami. After he met Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he took over a year to get himself free from his family, from his work. He was put in jail. There was intrigue. The way he got out of jail was very dangerous, but he did it. He was almost murdered on his journey across the hilly tract of land to get to where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was on the other side. He had a servant with him, and someone had intuited that they had money with them and wanted to kill Sanatan for the money. So Sanatan told the servant to hand over the money, gold coins. So he did. And the servant had secretly kept one gold coin. And Mahaprabhu told him, you take that and go back home. And the rest he had given away. Now Sanatan had nothing. And as he made his way away from that inn where he had almost been murdered for the money, he had nothing, no material assets, but he was on his way to Lord Chaitanya with no other encumbrance. And that's when he felt ecstasy. So in our sojourn in the material world, it takes a lot of work to hold on to the status quo here in the material world and try to make everything work out, because material nature keeps us twisting in the wind. So this story is a great reminder of the way in which Kalia was pushed down and then, as we'll see, becomes purified and actually surrenders to the Lord. But Krishna gives the invitation in the Bhagavad Gita that you could do this preemptively. You can decide at any time, I've had enough, and just say, I surrender, I give up. And anyone who even says this, even just as an exercise, to exercise the tongue, of course, it's better if you do it from your heart. But just the very concept that I'm going to surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead gives such relief. And from Krishna's side, in the Ramayana, Lord Ramachandra says that if anyone, even one time, says, my Lord, I surrender unto you now, he said, from that day, I become the protector of that person, and I award fearlessness to that person who surrenders to me. So this is real. Actual reality means devotional service. And illusion means holding on to that which cannot be held, and then crying when it goes away. So here we'll hear, in this next section, we'll hear how Kalia gets purified by the chastisement of Lord Krishna. 27. Seeing the Lord dancing, his servants in the heavenly planets, the Gandharvas, Siddhas, sages, Charnas, and the wives of the demigods immediately arrived there. With great pleasure, they began accompanying the Lord's dancing by playing drums such as mridangas, pandavas, and anakas. They also made offerings of songs, flowers, and prayers. Purport. When the demigods and other residents of higher planetary systems became aware that Lord Sri Krishna was personally putting on a wonderful demonstration of the art of dancing, they immediately came to offer their services. Dancing becomes more enjoyable and beautiful to watch when it is accompanied by expert drum playing, singing, and the chanting of prayers. The artistic atmosphere was also enhanced by the showering of a multitude of flowers upon Lord Sri Krishna, who is blissfully engaged in dancing upon the hoods of the Kalia serpent. Now, at some interval soon, I'm going to take the opportunity to hear some reflections or questions. So please stand by. Text 28. My dear king, Kalia had 101 prominent heads, and when one of them would not bow down, Lord Sri Krishna, who inflicts punishment on cruel wrongdoers, would smash that stubborn head by striking it with his feet. Then, as Kalia entered his death throes, he began wheeling his heads around and vomiting ghastly blood from his mouths and nostrils. The serpent thus experienced extreme pain and misery. Exuding poisonous waste from his eyes, Kalia would occasionally dare to raise up one of his heads, which would breathe heavily with anger. Then the Lord would dance on it and subdue it, forcing it to bow down with his foot. The demigods took each of these exhibitions as an opportunity to worship him, the primeval personality of Godhead, with showers of flowers. 30. My dear King Parikshit, Lord Krishna's wonderful, powerful dancing trampled and broke all of Kalia's 1,000 hoods. Then the serpent, profusely vomiting blood from his mouths, finally recognized Sri Krishna to be the eternal personality of Godhead, the supreme master of all moving and non-moving beings, Sri Narayan. Thus, within his mind, Kalia took shelter of the Lord. Purport. Well, I'm going to read that again because it's really important. Of course, every sentence is important, but this is a particular point that I think is echoed elsewhere in the Srimad Bhagavatam that is good to remember. Again, text 30, my dear King Parikshit, Lord Krishna's wonderful, powerful dancing trampled and broke all of Kalia's 100 hoods. Then the serpent, profusely vomiting blood from his mouths, finally recognized Sri Krishna to be the eternal personality of Godhead, the supreme master of all moving and non-moving beings, Sri Narayan. Thus, within his mind, Kalia took shelter of the Lord. I'll comment after the purport. Srila Prabhupada, in volume 1, chapter 16 of Krishna's Supreme Personality of Godhead. Oh, wait, this is the servants of Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada points out that whereas previously Kalia was vomiting poison, now his poison was exhausted and he began to vomit blood. Thus he had been cleansed of the vile contamination within his heart that had manifested as serpent's venom. The word smritva, remembering, is very significant here. The wives of Kalia were actually serious devotees of Lord Krishna, and according to the acharyas, they had often tried to convince their husbands to surrender to him. Well, we've heard that before. The wives of the Brahmanas, they were also great devotees, and their husbands were, unfortunately, sticks in the mud until they got the mercy of their wives. Finally, finding himself in unbearable agony, Kalia remembered his wife's advice, and took shelter of the Lord. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that Kalia's arch rival had traditionally been Garuda, the carrier of Vishnu, but now Kalia realized that he was fighting an opponent who is thousands of times stronger than Garuda, and who therefore could be only the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Thus, Kalia took shelter of Lord Krishna. Oh, here are a few points. One is that Manasa Jagama, Aranam, Manasa Jagama. This is the last three words in text number 30. Adana means for shelter. Manasa, within his mind, and Jagama, he approached. So at that time, the time that is when Kalia had his hoods smashed and broken by the lotus feet of Lord Krishna, in his mind, he decided, I'm going to surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This we find in Bali Maharaj, when he saw one of, according to our acharyas, the most beautiful forms of the Lord, Vamandev, approach him in the assembly of demons when he was performing ritualistic sacrifices to maintain his power in the universe. When he saw the Supreme Personality of Godhead enter, even at that time, he wasn't entirely acquainted with the fact that that was the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He had this inkling to surrender to the Lord. And therefore, later on in the pastime, it's described how the Lord's name is Sahagrahi Janardana. And that is that he takes the feeling of the devotee. When the devotee decides in his or her mind that I'm going to surrender to Krishna, Krishna takes that very, very, very seriously and moves heaven and earth to bring the devotee closer. So as I mentioned before, this moment in the sojourn of a living entity in the material world, when that living entity decides that I've had enough of the material world, I'm actually more attracted to Krishna, I'm going to surrender. It's a really big deal. In fact, it's the only really big deal in the universe. Everything else is recycled, chewing the chewed, doing the same things everyone else has done, eating, sleeping, mating, defending in various ways. And it's actually asinine. It makes a fool of the living entity. It's embarrassing. So to come out of all embarrassment, to give up the punishment by the material nature, one simply has to cry out to Krishna, please help me. I've had enough. I surrender to you. You're the best. You're the most beautiful. You're my only shelter. And even if it's done within the mind, Krishna hears that and he responds immediately. Here also, it's important to note that the wives of Kalia were actually very serious devotees. They had tried to convince their husband to surrender to him. Finally, finding himself in unbearable agony, Kalia remembered his wife's advice and took shelter of the Lord. So oftentimes, we may find ourselves talking to a relative, a friend, to an innocent person, or maybe not so innocent at that time, about Krishna consciousness, and we might find great resistance. No doubt, Kalia had great resistance to the advice of his wives to surrender to Krishna. But later we'll see that teaching that you gave, going out of your way to teach somebody about Krishna consciousness, it comes to bear at the right time. You're speaking on behalf of Krishna. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, surrender unto me. And as his representative, if you, in your most diplomatic way, say to others, you should surrender to Krishna, you're speaking on behalf of Krishna. And later, when the living entity becomes confounded by his or her experience in the material world, he or she will remember those words and remember that there's an opportunity here to surrender the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So don't think that your words ever go in vain when you're teaching Bhagavad Gita, when you're teaching Srimad Bhagavatam to others. Those words go into the ears into the heart, and they remain there, and they will come out at the right time. And they are part of the internal energy, because when you speak on behalf of Krishna, he's speaking through you, and his words become manifest in the hearts of others. That's why we go out and teach Krishna consciousness to others, because it has an effect. And now we're going to take a few comments. Let's see logistically how this works. You can either check in on Facebook with a comment, written comment, or if you'd like to make a verbal comment, you can voice it through your Zoom by unmuting yourself and stating your reflection or your question. Shall we try it? Hey, Havi's here. Hare Krishna. Havi Prabhu ki jai. Thomas, Hare Krishna. Yes, Thomas Haribol Prabhu is saying, this is just the medicine we need, a timely remembrance. Krishna is our supreme shelter. Surrender to the antidote to any material threat that we may face. Yeah, that's the medicine, hearing Krishna's pastimes. And I think that Rupa Manjari earlier was mentioning that some of these pastimes are very gory. People like gore and all types of violence and movies and plays, even, and sometimes as they see other people suffering, think, well, maybe my life's not so bad. But when we hear about Krishna's bloodletting on the battlefields and beating up Kalia and so forth, there's a kind of satisfaction seeing that Krishna's a hero and he can defeat the greatest forces in the material nature. Okay, somebody unmuted, I hear on Zoom. Did you have a comment? Or was that an accident?
Hare Krishna,
Okay.
Guru Maharaj, thank you so much for the wonderful reading. This is Shraddha Devi Dasi. Maharaj, I was thinking at the wonderful choice of the topic, serpent, especially when there are talks that the coronavirus started from the serpent. I actually also liked your comment that you made about when we have a collective memory of being defeated in the material world. I really like the word collective, because just once being defeated is not enough for this soul that really wants to enjoy.
Yeah.
Collective memory.
Yeah,
And then when you meet a devotee, then that combination will give the soul an impetus, to take to Krishna consciousness. And I was thinking about how a person can take beating throughout the week, and then over the weekend when the devotees go out for doing book distribution, that's a very good combination there.
Yes.
That helps people take to Krishna consciousness.
Yes, thank you for your reflections. There's the state of the heart of the living entities is everything, because we're driven by our heart, and that's what carries us from one life to the next. But even the slightest hint of surrender to Krishna becomes the impetus for us to, or for the higher authorities to give us more facility for devotional service. Prabhupada the other day in a talk I was listening to was saying that we don't get to choose at the end of this life where we're going, but he said there's a panel that decides, just like when you go for an interview and there's a panel of people there that decides what are your qualifications and so forth. So this contact with devotees combined with the state of our heart of desiring to surrender is so very important. Thank you very much, Shraddha. What other points do you have? Anyone?
This is Rupa Manjari Dasi.
Hey, you're on both Facebook and
Well,
Zoom.
I realized that it would be easier to come. So it's kind of based on what Shraddha Mata just said. But I noticed that you brought up Vamandev and Bali Maharaj, and in both of these cases, these these persons, they got actually what we consider to be our life's goal, which is Bhagavan's foot on their head. And you talked about how they needed to be subdued, but I was wondering, to what extent is it that was actually that they got special mercy because of their connection, that they were beloved and dear to his devotees? Like, does he do that? Is it that he's giving them mercy because he loves Prahlad Maharaj, or he loves the Nagapatni? So he's like, okay, for you, I will give this person who's dear to you this special mercy?
Yes. That's mentioned by Sanatana Goswami in the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, that Bali Maharaj got so much mercy because he was the grandson of Prahlad. Prahlad, in fact, shows up and visits during that pastime. And even Banasura was a descendant and therefore got some special consideration from the Lord. So Prabhupada used to put it as, love me, love my dog. When there's some proximity to a devotee, then, and especially if one becomes connected through service or even through lineage, there's a way in which the Lord gives special consideration. That's actually the main technique of bhakti, is to connect oneself to a devotee. In fact, Prabhupada mentions it in the pastime of Gajendra, who had been captured by a crocodile and then struggling for hundreds of years, thousands of years in the water, and realizing that he couldn't be victorious over the crocodile in the water, he surrendered and he offered prayers to the Lord. And when the Lord came down and liberated him and the crocodile, Prabhupada then says that the crocodile got special mercy because he was at the feet of Gajendra, who was a devotee. He was connected to him, not in a very pleasant way, but still connected. So there's a lot of evidence for that in the Shastra, about how the Lord notices when we're connected with a devotee somehow or other and gives special consideration. Thank you for the point, Rupa Manjari. Mataji. Here we have, why do we forget Krishna again, even after repeating that I surrender to you? How do we remember it 24/7 that we have surrendered to Krishna? So the way to remember it 24/7 is to be engaged in the process of devotional service as it is dictated by the Shastra and the Guru, and follow the example of the sadhus. And at first, it may be a little mechanical, but you have to work the program. There is a program. It's very clearly laid out by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu through his disciples, and they say exactly what to do. For instance, there's the Pancharatric system, which was mostly enumerated by Narada Muni, our great savior and guardian. And then, of course, Sanatana Goswami wrote the Hari Bhakti Vilas on the request of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, telling about what's the daily life of a devotee supposed to look like. And then we have the examples of acharyas like Srila Prabhupada and others. And so in the beginning, we have to take the Shastra and the teachings of the Guru, who says, do it like this, regulate your life like this, and we have to follow it almost in military fashion. And then even if we forget, we'll be brought back by the process. We'll be saved by that in the beginning, even though I'm not inclined toward it, because I'm following out of a sense of duty even, or even out of fear that if I don't do this, I'm going to go back to the way I was. And so remembering that and going on means that gradually, by the process of sadhana, one will then develop a more spontaneous attitude towards it. There's a taste. And not only does it become more natural to live the life as it was recommended by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but one actually gets a taste for it. And then the devotional service becomes more spontaneous. And Prabhupada gives this example in one of his purports. He says that when you learn how to type, at first you have to follow the typing book. And you have to be very conscious of where you put each finger so that you get the finger on the right key. But after a while, when you practice, you don't need to follow the book anymore. Your fingers naturally go to those keys. So he gives this as a description of Vaidhi Bhakti and Raga Bhakti. Then in the beginning, devotional service may be regulated by the scripture and by the guru, but then gradually one develops a taste and automatically goes there. It's our nature to be attracted to Krishna, but right now my consciousness has been diverted. So we have to practice a lot. It means every day. And work the program, because if you work the program, then you'll naturally start to make advancement and you'll get a taste. Thank you. What an important and nice question. Yes.
Thank you so much. Dhanyavad Pranam. It's Mukharavind Das here.
Hare Krishna Mukharavinda.
I was just missing this evening classes. I was just yesterday thinking, wow, it's like been so long that we didn't had your this evening classes. I'm very happy. Somehow I missed earlier joining. But I have a question from yesterday. In the class you were mentioning that this material problem, we should, whatever we are going through in our life or everything, we should be methodological. And so my question is that, like, we try to methodological, but my is so strong that I just see that I keep entering more and more and more to even. So what is the methodological means, Guru Maharaj? I could not understand that. Even we try to methodological, but there is no end of, like, we can enter into the taking care of our material things, and there is no end of.
Yeah. So let me repeat the question in case it was hard to hear on Facebook or anywhere else. So Mukharavinda Prabhu was saying that last night in a class I was saying, when dealing with the material energy, it's not that we can simply neglect it, because then it will swallow us up and we'll be out of balance, and it will be very difficult for us to perform regulated devotional service. And therefore, I mentioned this phrase, which helps me. It's a mantra: be methodical but dispassionate when dealing with the material nature. The advice comes from Krishna, actually. He says you have to do your duty in the material world, but he recommends that you be sama, or equal, whether you do well or you don't do well, or whether there's the success you're looking for, siddha siddho, you perfected it or you didn't perfect it. The material nature, he says, always has some defect to it, whatever duty you do. So don't get too upset about whether it goes well or not, but do what you can with what you have right now. And methodically means that take care of your immediate duties to the best of your ability. Now, of course, at different phases of your life, you're going to have different duties, and some of them appear to be more intense than others. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu recommended that we do our duties, but and he recommended this especially through his disciples. And Rupa Goswami says, Atyahara prayashascha. So Atyahara means extreme eating or extreme collecting. So he said, don't get too caught up in collecting too much or in eating too much in the material world. Ati means extreme and ahara means eating. So atyahara. So do your duty methodically, do what you have to do, but also balance it. Keep in mind that you don't have to fully load up everything in the material world and be at the top of every particular endeavor, because first of all, it'll only happen according to your previous karmas anyway. And second of all, it doesn't matter because it's all going to slide off at any second anyway. So methodically means balance it out to make sure that you're leaving time for your paramartika duties. Finish those at the cost of your own life, said Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj. Make sure that you make a slot to finish your fundamental practice of Krishna consciousness every day. Don't give in to the idea that I have to work harder and harder on all my material duties and neglect the other part, because you won't be successful. On the other hand, people who dedicate more and more time to their spiritual duties, somehow or other they get successful. And Krishna says so many things about this, and so do his devotees. For instance, in the Gita, Krishna says, Vedishu yagyeshu tapasu chaiva dhaneshu yat punyapalam pratishnam adyeti tat sarvamidam vaditva yogi paramstanam upaiti chajam, which means that if you do devotional service, you're not bereft of the results of reading all the Vedas, of performing sacrifices, of giving in charity, etc., etc. All the things that you'd think of that to be expert or successful in the material world you have to do. He said all those are achieved by the process of devotional service.
Mm.
And similarly, as you know, and we mentioned this last night, Narada Muni says, Tasyaya viheto prayate kovido talapite yad brahmatamu paryada talabhyate dukhavaranyata sukham kalena sarvatra kabhira ramhasa. In due course of time, you're going to get whatever you're going to get in the material nature. Good and bad is going to come to you. Don't worry about it so much. Just try to stay in balance and depend on Krishna for the rest of it, and you'll be okay.
Thank you.
Because it's Krishna consciousness that you need. Thanks for your question.
Thank you so much.
And if it seems hard right now in the material nature, and I'm not just saying right now because, you know, it seems kind of strange all over the world right now for some reason. It seems like a little oppressive, but that comes and goes. For instance, in the 7th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, we find how, you know, one day the demigods got this information that there's somebody down performing austerities. And, you know, at first it just comes as a little news flash that, you know, hey, there's fire coming out of this person's head. And then, you know, Brahma, you better go check it out because I think he wants your job. So Brahma comes down, he checks it out. And the next thing the demigods know is they're subservient to this person. I mean, it happens so fast out of nowhere. That's the material world. Prabhupada said, coming across on the Jaladuta, he noticed that the ocean would be smooth and peaceful. And then just a few hours later, they would be smashing in the waves. And it's very dangerous, the material nature. That's Maya, he says. Maya is just like that. It looks, everything's fine. And a few minutes later, everything's not fine. So Krishna keeps saying to us over and over again in the Bhagavad Gita, you have to learn how to stay steady through both the ups and the downs. Don't think that it's peaches and cream. And don't think summer all summer. Think winter into summer. Because that's the nature of the material world. At the same time, if you make sure that you're injecting into your ears and taking the transcendental sound and taking advantage of the process of Krishna consciousness, it'll open up a space for you that you'll be able to peacefully engage in the process of bhajan. So you have to get your bhajan on. Work the process. Work the program. Because if the thing is, if we stop working the program, then we fall apart again. And that's just the way it is. That's called the way it is. So if you want to know the way it is, you can find out the hard way or the easy way. And the easy way is to surrender to Krishna and follow the program. And you don't even have to be perfect at that. You just have to be sincere and try the best of your ability. And even if you start with a little bit, you're going to be successful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. So let's see. Are there any more questions or comments?
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj.
Oh, it's
This is
Kentucky. How do you that you came all the way out here to get all kinds of experiences in association now. See, now you see what I'm talking about. Okay, go ahead. Nice to hear your voice.
So I have a question. You mentioned about the surrender, that even when we say at least like once in our mind even, right, that we surrender to Krishna, he takes it, right? But like, what does it mean for us? What's gonna happen next? Like, if Krishna sends different situations to us, that we actually have to show him this surrender, because this kind of expectation comes, like, what's gonna happen next?
Yeah, that's how to have an exciting life, right? I mean, what's going to happen? We don't know what's going to happen next anyway. But when I'm in Maya, I think I'm going to control the situation and make what I want to happen happen. And what we call misery is when the material nature goes against my plan. That's what we don't like. You know, we're going a certain way. And I want it to be like this. This is what it looks like. I'm in the center and I get what I want. And the next thing, it goes the opposite way. And we go, I'm suffering. And when it goes the opposite way really fast and really hard, that's what we call a disaster. You call it cataclysmic. But you know, this morning I was out in the garden chanting japa early in the morning, and I saw this earthworm, and he was going across the pathway. First of all, I was wondering, how do you know where you're going? Because you don't have any eyes. And you know, he just knows I'm going from here to there. And on the same time, I was having a little conversation in my head with the earthworm, and I'm going, you don't know anything about the, what's that thing called? The corona. You don't know anything about the coronavirus, do you? And he's like, no, I don't know anything about it. I just like the smell of the earth down here. You know? And I was just thinking, like, what do the birds know? What do the earthworms know? It's a way in which we become particularly ensconced in the material nature because of my frame of mind. And I'm saying it has to be like this or it has to be like that. And when it's not, then I feel disturbed. It's an example I gave before because I had this realization when we had an earthquake here in California. And earthquakes come out of nowhere. There's no warning. All of a sudden, you know, everything changes just in a second. And then I was thinking afterwards, you know, there was all this strung and drung on the news, and everyone was talking about it for weeks, months, the earthquake and this and that. The houses fell down, fires started, the freeway got pancaked. And then I was thinking, you know, if I just lived up on a hill in a teepee or something like that, it wouldn't have been a big deal. It's just a big deal because I put up a house right I put a house up on an earthquake fault line. So then it makes a bigger impression because my house is there. And I think the house should be here. But who said your house should be there? I just decided I'm going to have a house here. And then I become disturbed about it. So the way we stake out our claim here in the material world and say, this is the way it has to be, this is my place, that's what gets disturbing. So if we surrender ourselves to Krishna and say, Krishna, whatever your plan is, I'm going to follow that, and we just adapt ourselves to it, then where's the disturbance? It becomes more exciting and interesting than anything else. And Prabhupada said there's a replacement for every one of the four regulative principles, or that is the sinful activities, the four sinful activities, and one of them is gambling. And so this gambling can be replaced, he said, by surrendering to Krishna, because then you put your life in his hands, and then it's like, oh, what's going to happen next? Who knows? So yeah, just know for certain that Krishna is our well-wisher, and that our constitutional position is to be a servant. And then figure out what he wants you to do, and then try to do that. And that's surrender. And you'll be fine. You'll be better than fine. I mean, it's the most exalted situation and position in the material world. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Guru Maharaj.
Hari Bol. Okay, I'm going to read just a few more. Now, I understand it's late for some of you, but extraordinary circumstances call for extraordinary measures. And that means I'm going to soldier on here with a few more verses because we're really stuck at a point here where we're not sure what's going to happen. So let's see. Text 31. When Kalia's wives saw how the serpent had become so fatigued from the excessive weight of Lord Krishna, who carries the entire universe in his abdomen, and how Kalia's umbrella-like hoods had been shattered by the striking of Krishna's heels, they felt great distress. With their clothing, ornaments, and hair scattered in disarray, they then approached the eternal personality of Godhead. Let's see if I can get you a picture here. Okay, this is one of the beautiful paintings. Can you see that?
Yeah, yes.
Isn't that beautiful? The contrast of Krishna with his delicate fingers and toes and beautiful, sensitive skin, and he's dancing on this monstrous beast. It's just such a contrast. Purport. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Kalia's wives had been disgusted with their husband because of his demoniac activities. They had been thinking, if this atheist is killed by the punishment of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then let him be killed. We will become widows and engage in the worship of the Supreme Lord. But then the ladies noticed Kalia's facial expression and other bodily features, and they understood that Kalia had indeed taken shelter of the Lord within his mind. Seeing that he was manifesting symptoms of humility, remorse, regret, and doubt, they thought, just see how fortunate we are. Our husband has now become a Vaishnava. Therefore, we must now endeavor to protect him. They felt affection for their repentant husband and severe distress because of his miserable position, and thus altogether they went into the presence of the Supreme Lord. That is profound. 32. Their minds very much disturbed, those saintly ladies placed their children before them and then bowed down to the Lord of all creatures, laying their bodies flat upon the ground. They desired the liberation of their sinful husband and the shelter of the Supreme Lord, the giver of ultimate shelter, and thus they folded their hands in supplication and approached him. Tastam su vigna manasota paras kritarbha kayam nidhaya bhuvibhuta patim pranemu sadva kritanjali puta shamalasya bhartur mokshe sava shavanadham sharanam prapanna. Beautiful, beautiful verse. They put their bodies on the ground before him, offer their prayers. The wives of the Kalia serpent said, the punishment this offender has been subjected to is certainly just. After all, you have incarnated within this world to curb down envious and cruel persons. You are so impartial that you look equally upon your enemies and your own sons. For when you impose a punishment on a living being, you know it to be for his ultimate benefit. What you have done here is actually mercy for us, since the punishment you give to the wicked certainly drives away all their contamination. Indeed, because this conditioned soul, our husband, is so sinful that he has assumed the body of a serpent, your anger toward him is obviously to be understood as your mercy. Purport. Srila Madhvacharya points out in this connection that when a pious person suffers in this world, he realizes the punishment the Supreme Lord is meting out to me is actually his causeless mercy. Envious persons, however, even after being punished by the Lord for their purification, continue to envy him and be resentful. And this attitude is the reason for their continued failure to understand the absolute truth. Did our husband carefully perform austerities in a previous life with his mind free of pride and full of respect for others? Is that why you are pleased with him? Or did he, in some previous existence, carefully execute religious duties with compassion for all living beings. And is that why you, the life of all living beings, are now satisfied with him? Purport. In this regard, Srila Prabhupada comments in his Krsna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Volume 1, Chapter 16, the Nagapatnis confirm that one cannot come in contact with Krishna without having executed pious activities in devotional service in one's previous lives. As Lord Chaitanya advised in the Shikshashtika, one has to execute devotional service by humbly chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, thinking oneself lower than the straw in the street and not expecting honor for oneself, but offering all kinds of honor to others. The Nagapatnis were astonished that, although Kalia had the body of a serpent as the result of grievous sinful activities, at the same time, he was in contact with the Lord to the extent that the Lord's lotus feet were touching his hoods. Certainly, this was not the ordinary result of pious activities. These two contradictory facts astonished them. We find these kinds of contradictory circumstances throughout the Bhagavatam. Another example is Vritrasura, who was born to be a demon and a punisher of Indra, the king of the Devas, Krishna's representatives here in the material world. But he ended up being more of a devotee than Indra. He was a pure devotee from his very core. It comes out in his words. So it's contradictory that this gigantic demon that was fearsome to everyone in the universe and all pious people actually loathed him, was to the core of his heart a pure devotee of the Lord. So we see it again and again. You can't judge where bhakti is going to manifest. Text 36. O Lord, we do not know how the serpent Kalia has attained this great opportunity of being touched by the dust of your lotus feet. For this end, the goddess of fortune performed austerities for centuries, giving up all other desires and taking austere vows. Those who have attained the dust of your lotus feet never hanker for the kingship over heaven, limitless sovereignty, the position of Brahma, or rulership over the earth. They are not interested even in the perfections of yoga or in liberation itself. O Lord, although this Kalia, the king of the serpents, has taken birth in the mode of ignorance and is controlled by anger, he has achieved that which is difficult for others to achieve. Embodied souls who are full of desires and are thus wandering in the cycle of birth and death can have all benedictions manifested before their eyes simply by receiving the dust of your lotus feet. Purport: it is very rare for a conditioned soul to free himself from contamination of illusion and thus become established in perfect consciousness of the absolute truth. And yet this benediction was achieved by the serpent Kalia because the Lord personally danced upon the serpent's hoods with his lotus feet. Although we conditioned souls may not receive the mercy of having the Lord dance on our head, we can receive the dust of the lotus feet of the Absolute through the Lord's representative, the bona fide spiritual master, and thus go back home, back to Godhead, forever freed from the misery of ignorance of the mundane universe. We offer our obeisances unto you, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Although present in the hearts of all living beings as the Supersoul, you are all pervasive. And although the original shelter of all created material elements, you exist prior to their creation. And although the cause of everything, you are transcendental to all material cause and effect, being the Supreme Soul. Purport: the beautiful Sanskrit poetry of this verse should be chanted out loud for the transcendental pleasure of the reciter and the hearer. Namastubhyam Bhagavate Purushaya Mahatmane Bhuta Vasaya Bhutaya Paraya Paramatmane. Text number 40. Obeisances unto you, the absolute truth, who are the reservoir of all transcendental consciousness and potency and the possessor of unlimited energies. Although completely free of material qualities and transformations, we are the prime mover of material nature. Purport: those who consider themselves intellectual, philosophic, or rational should carefully note here that the absolute truth, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the ocean of all knowledge and consciousness. Thus, surrendering unto the Supreme Lord does not entail giving up the method of rationally comprehending reality. Rather, one merges into the ocean of rational, logical comprehension. The Supreme Lord is the perfection of all sciences and all forms of knowledge, and only envious and trivial minds would deny this obvious fact. What a purport, huh? Obeisances unto you, who are time itself, the shelter of time, and the witness of time in all its phases. You are the universe and also its separate observer. You are its creator and also the totality of all its causes. Purport: the Supreme Personality of Godhead, although appearing in different incarnations, can never be limited by time, since he is time himself, the shelter of time and the witness of time and all its phases. Obeisances unto you, who are the ultimate soul of the physical elements, of the subtle basis of perception, of the senses, of the vital air of life, and of the mind, intelligence, and consciousness. By your arrangements, the infinitesimal spirit souls falsely identify with the three modes of material nature, and their perception of their own true self thus becomes clouded. We offer our obeisances unto you, the unlimited Supreme Lord, the supremely subtle one, the omniscient personality of Godhead, who are always fixed in unchanging transcendence, who sanction the opposing views of different philosophies, and who are the power upholding expressed ideas and the words that express them. What sublime prayer is coming from these Nagapatnis, isn't it? Amazing subtleties of the philosophy of life and of observation of the way the world works and who Krishna is. They know intimate details of Krishna and his workings because they're devotees. Bhaktyaham abhijanati yavanyas chasmi tatvataha tatumam tatvato gyatva vishite taranantaram. Vishite means to enter into the anantaram, unlimited mysteries of Krishna's existence. If you become a devotee, then you can know everything. Otherwise, Gyanis, Karmis, Yogis, they can't know Krishna, only Bhaktas. So it's simple devotion by serving Vaishnavas, becoming a surrendered soul to Krishna, seeing oneself as lower than the straw on the street, being very, very humble, and depending on Krishna, offering respects to him within everyone's heart. This is devotional service, and especially praying to him through chanting Hare Krishna, Harinam Sankirtan. These things are the panacea. So we'll take some final comments or questions.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. This is Lekha.
Oh, Hare Krishna, Lekha.
Maharaj, I have a question regarding the response you gave for Divyangi's question. So you're telling about like how we should figure out what Krishna wants us to do and try to do that. How do we figure out what Krishna wants us to do? I feel like sometimes I kind of like blend in my own thoughts, and then I end up realizing that that's exactly what Krishna didn't want me to do. So how do we figure out what Krishna wants us to do?
Read the Bhagavad Gita. That's how.
Okay.
Because he says it very clearly there. Manmana bhavamad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mami vaishyasi yuktvai mana mat parayana. So let's analyze what he wants you to do, okay? Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, manmana bhavamad bhakto. First two things he says, always think of me. Second one is he says, become my devotee. Mam yaji, mam namaskuru. So the third one is he says, worship me. And the fourth one, namaskuru, offer obeisances unto me.
Right. Okay.
So here's 4 things that Krishna wants you to do, right in the Bhagavad Gita, but there are more. So if you go through the Bhagavad Gita with the mindset that Krishna is speaking directly to you, Bhagavad Gita is not just some historical book. It's actually the Lord incarnated, personally. And if you open your receptors to that idea and you read it, sit there and read it and think, this is what Krishna is saying to me right now. And you pick it up, then you'll be following Krishna. That's why he spoke the Bhagavad Gita, to save us all and give us an opportunity to know what he wants. Does that help?
Yes, Maharaj. Thank you very much. That definitely helps.
All right, good. What else? What other questions or comments? I see there's more here on Facebook, I think. Okay, go ahead. Anyone from Zoom? Oh, here's Shami Prash said something. Nityananda Prabhu acted out this Kalia Leela with his friends in Chaitanya Bhagavat. Adi 9, Chaitanya Bhagavat says that they would play out Krishna Leela all day and night. The boys wouldn't even return to their home, even return home to their parents. All right, then that's what we're going to do. Divyanga wrote in, work in the program. We just talked about that this morning. And here, Daniel says, I want to thank my dear friend Sean Cannon for introducing me to Lord Krishna through our contact on the internet and beginning my journey of Bhakti Yoga. My connection to Sean shows in my love for God and my feelings of mercy for Lord Krishna. I am constantly amazed, and it makes me wonder how dear he must be. What a beautiful devotee. Oh, isn't that nice? Really nice. Okay, any last points that anyone would like to make?
Thank you so much, Guru Maharaj, for coming. We just
Okay. Could everyone please unmute themselves? If you're on Facebook, please, and you're listening, then put in Hare Krishna, right? Hare Krishna. And if you're on Zoom, you can unmute yourself right now and say Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
One more time. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Remember, keep the transcendental vibration going. If you feel your mind is becoming overwhelmed or distracted or whatever, like keep coming back to the Maha Mantra and just take shelter, because Krishna is all powerful and he's there in his name. And so it's a great lesson that we're all being given a chance to learn here, is really how to take shelter of Krishna through his names. Gaur Premanande Haribo. Guru Vishya Kripasanabhe Vicha Patitanam Pavanibhyo Vaishnavebhyo Hiroshi Konakashima Sayonara and Oyasumi Nasai. Hare Krishna.
Hare
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Nachari Marman, Nachari Marman, Nachari Marman, Nachari Marman, hey, Nachari Marman, Nachari Marman, Nachari Marman, Nachari Marman.